I can't believe I'm talking to you. You're one of the greatest libertarian minds of all time,
Well,
no doubt.
I hope you're taping now. Did you start the tape?
Yeah, yeah,
Good,
yeah.
great.
But I would
Nope.
say about
Elaborate on that. No, I'm kidding.
no, I just wanted to say like about I'd say like 6 months or so ago, I read your book Defending the Undefendable, and I was at a time where I was extremely right wing, kind of conservative or whatever, and I had all this cognitive dissonance about it and whatever. And I mean, you got me believing in non-aggression principle and property rights and having some principles. So, first off, I want to say thank you for your work and what you do. Um, what I want to know, like my first question is, how do you stay so brave in your arguments and for so long? You never seem to waver. It's always, you know, just the best argument you can put forward, despite what anybody thinks. And I just want to know how you go about doing that.
Well, I was fortunate to have a mentor and a friend and a guide, Murray Rothbard, and I try to emulate him the best I can. I try to make him proud of me as much as I can, and he was like that. Who else is like that? Bernie Sanders. I went to high school
Yeah.
with him. We were on the track team. Bernie Sanders also is like that. Namely, he takes a premise, I think in his case, the wrong premises, but he takes a premise and he goes with it and he keeps going and he doesn't let anything stop him. He was the one that started the socialism business in 2015 when it wasn't as popular as it was now, and people were saying, well, you lose votes. And so I'm not running away from socialism. His most recent thing is democracy. He loves democracy, voting, whatever. And he takes it to its logical conclusion, namely, felons should vote. And not only felons who are out of jail, but felons who are in jail. Because there's a slippery slope, and if we don't let felons in jail vote, we won't let anyone vote kind of thing. And Murray Rothbard was like that. He would take the non-aggression principle of libertarianism and man acts of Austrian economics, and he would just go with that. And he wouldn't tolerate any contradictions to it or any compromises with it. He just wanted to see where it led him, and wherever it led him, that's where he was. Well, I try my best to do that too. And so me, Bernie, and Murray, three Jews from New York City. Maybe it's a Jewish thing, maybe it's a New York City thing. Obviously not. I'm just being silly there. But I think that my career, such as it is predicated on doing just that, starting with the non-aggression principle and private property rights based on homesteading, as I say, in libertarianism and human action in Austrian economics, and just sort of deducing from that and deducing wherever it leads. And sometimes it leads in weird places, but
Yeah.
I don't run away from that. I embrace it because, well, look, I conceivably could run away from that if it was really horrible, if it meant the death of everybody in the world, and I'd run away from it. But happily, it means the life for everyone in the world. It means prosperity. It means utilitarianism. It means all sorts of good things.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, One of the things that you're kind of most notorious for that you don't run away from is this idea of you should be allowed to have a voluntary slave contract. Can you like just justify that like real quick?
Right. Well, the example I use, God forbid my son has a horrible disease. And I love my son very much. And it'll cost 10 million for him to be cured of this disease. And I don't have anything like 10 million. But you're a very rich man and you've long wanted me to be your slave. And you could order me around and I could pick cotton or teach you economics or whatever it was. And we make a deal. I'll be your slave if you give me 10 million. And with all voluntary trades, we all gain in the ex ante sense. Namely, I gain because I value my son's life more than my freedom. You gain because you value my servitude to you more than the 10 million. You're very rich. You're like Bill Gates or something. So we both gain in the ex ante sense. Now, ex post, we might regret trade, but that always occurs. You have a nice black shirt. I have a nice white shirt. We bought it for $15 each. And at the time, we valued it at more than 15. Not at 15 because we're too lazy. We wouldn't buy something unless there was a gain for us. But afterward, we might say, well, I wish I had the black shirt and you wish you had the white shirt, and we both regret it. So sometimes you regret trades afterward. But in the prospect, you never regret a trade. Otherwise, why would you do it? So voluntary slavery will save my son's life. And if the law says you can't do it, my son dies. There was this case in Canada where a man had a 4-year-old son and he needed a liver transplant. And the guy said, I'll give $500,000 for a liver. And he put him in jail, the bastards. They put him in jail for trying to save his son's life. Why? Because it's illegal to buy and sell used body parts. This is despicable.
Wow.
So it's also despicable to not allow voluntary slavery because that's a hypothetical case, but this is a real case. And yet both of them are a little bit out there, buying and selling body parts, buying and selling people, buying and selling any damn thing, as long as it's voluntary.
Right. Yeah. It might seem really simple to a lot of people, but I don't know if I heard this first from you or Rothbard, but that when you make a trade, you value the money less than what you're trading for. Not equal and less, or equal and or less. It's less, and that really changed my view on economics.
Well, to get back to your black shirt, you valued it. Let's say you valued it at 15, and the price is 15. You wouldn't buy it. You wouldn't get off your rear end and buy it. There'd be nothing in it for you to gain. So why would you do it? It would be you'd be indifferent. You would look at them equally, the 15 and the shirt. So you wouldn't get off your rear end and do it because you're a lazy bum. I'm kidding, of course. You're an economizer. You're trying to maximize your prosperity, your welfare. Now, if you valued it at 16, you would do it because there's a buck in it for you.
Right. Yeah. I recently read your article, Is Milton Friedman a Libertarian? Thanks for taking that on, because that's he's someone who just seems to be above criticism somehow. And I love that you just, put it to bed. No, he's not a libertarian. But what I noticed from that article is you cite Jared Taylor. And I've noticed that you cite Jared Taylor, and Tom Woods often cites Jared Taylor. And that's who I read a lot before I got into libertarianism. And I wanted to know, what are your takeaways, your key takeaways from Jared Taylor, and where does he go wrong?
Well, I don't know that he goes wrong anywhere. He's a white supremacist. I'm a white supremacist. I think whites are supreme in Baroque music. I'm also a black supremacist. I think blacks are supreme in jazz music. I'm a white supremacist in swimming. You look at the Olympic swimming pool and there are no blacks in there. It's not because they're not allowed in there. It's because they're just not good at swimming. You look at the quarter mile or the 100-yard dash, there are no whites in the finals, or even in the semifinals. So blacks are superior in that. So nothing wrong with pointing out that each group is superior in different regards. Doesn't mean that whites should rule blacks because we're better at Baroque and swimming, nor that blacks should rule whites because they're better at jazz and running. That's crazy. And Jared Taylor never says anything like that. He considers himself a racial realist, and I think realism is good. And it should be racial realism and political realism and economic realism and any Apple realism. I don't know what Apple realism is, but whatever it is, I'm for Apple realism as opposed to Apple unrealism. So I don't know that he diverges from the truth in anything. I'm sure there are things. Maybe he's not an anarchist. I don't know. I'm sure I disagree with him on, 1% of everything. I disagree with everybody on 1% of everything. Heck, I disagree with myself. No, I don't. If I did, I would change. With regard to Milton Friedman, he's more of a classical liberal. And by the way, he is criticized very heavily by our friends on the left. I mean, he once went to where was it, Chile or Argentina? I think Chile, and he gave a lecture to Pinochet and said, "Hey, Pinochet, embrace free enterprise. Free enterprise is great," and the left never forgave him for that. Whereas he went to China and he said the same thing, namely embrace free enterprise, and somehow that's okay. From the left point of view, they were vicious at him, and I certainly I look upon him as a sort of a mentor. I mean, he was really good on minimum wage and rent control and free trade and occupational licensure, and the list goes on and on. But he's a little weak on monetary theory and on what do you call it, educational vouchers, where he spent a lot of his time. So my attitude toward him is, well, compared to what? There's that joke. The Economist was asked, "How is your wife?" And the answer was, "Compared to what?" Well, compared to Ron Paul and Murray Rothbard, Milton Friedman was a commie. Compared to Bernie, Milton Friedman was, an anarchist practically. So it's a matter of comparison.
Yeah, I guess that's just where I'm at right now personally. Is I'm learning all these things, and then I'm like, damn, Milton Friedman is not what he's not as extreme as I thought he was. Um,
No,
yeah,
he's not that good. I had a long back and forth with him over Hayek's Road to Serfdom. Did you read that?
no,
No. Well, you might be interested in that. And I was very respectful. I mean, he's older than me. He's a gargantuan figure in the freedom movement.
yeah,
But we have our disputes. I think he gave away the store too much. The negative income tax, and he was against gold, and he was a ban on a whole bunch of things. So, on the other hand, he was excellent on many things as well.
yeah. Um, yeah. Can you explain your opinion on the school vouchers?
Well, you see, one of my criticisms of him is that he's sort of like an efficiency expert for the state, and we don't want the state to become more efficient because the state is not good. It's bad.
Right.
Let me give you one more example of that before I get into school vouchers. I'm a professor. I'm never supposed to answer questions directly. Let's talk about the draft, the
Okay.
military draft during the war in Vietnam. Now, look, as libertarians, I obviously oppose the draft. But the reason he opposed the draft, one, on a good side for him, was because it's, slavery, and not voluntary slavery either. Secondly, it would make the U.S. military more efficient. There'd be less fragging of officers. You wouldn't be putting Elvis Presley and Muhammad Ali in the army because they could produce a lot more in the civilian labor force. So there'd be more efficiency. But then the U.S. military would be more efficient if we had volunteer military. But I didn't want the U.S. military to be more efficient because they were doing something bad. And if you're doing something bad, we want less efficiency. Now, it doesn't mean I favor the draft, but it means that I oppose eliminating the draft on that ground. Okay, so with that introduction, let's talk about school vouchers. This is an attempt on part of Milton Friedman to make public education more efficient. Well, I don't want public education to be more efficient. I want public education to disappear. Because public education is socialist education, and the government is involved, and it shouldn't be. The government should not be, they say, what is it? We should have separation of church and state. Well, we should also have separation of education and state and separation of roads and state. I once was in a debate with him, and I called him a road socialist because he favored government highways and streets. And he didn't much like that, but he really was. He favored government roads. So you're a road socialist. Well, he's an educational socialist. Yes, it will make public education more efficient. On the other hand, it'll make private education less efficient because with school vouchers, anyone can go to any school, and with laws against discrimination, I mean, the inner city problem of inner city schools will now go to the suburbs, make that less efficient. But that's just efficiency. The idea here is we should eliminate it. Now, I don't know if he ever said, well, if I had my druthers, I'd eliminate it, but this is a second best policy. He should have said that. He should have said that loud and clear. He should have said that often. He didn't. He might have said it once. I don't know. I don't know everything he ever said about it. But look, suppose we had government restaurants, all government restaurants, just like school. There were no private restaurants, and you want to go to a restaurant, you had to go to a government restaurant. But the government restaurants were inefficient. You were assigned the restaurant in your neighborhood. You couldn't go to another restaurant. And now I'm supporting restaurant vouchers to make the government restaurants more efficient, because now if there's a lousy one, none of us will go there. We'll go to the other one. That's free enterprise? No. Free enterprise is we should have private restaurants. Well, free
Right.
enterprise, we should have private schools.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess it's just so ingrained in us that the education is just a public thing. It comes from the state. But yeah, it's absolutely crazy to me. And I'm at the point where now I can't, I want to have kids, and there's no way in the world I would ever send anyone to a state school. I would, homeschool and educate myself. And I'm wondering, how do you believe all this about the state, but yet you're a professor at a university?
Well, I was a professor at a public university. Right now, I'm a professor at a private university, but the private
Right.
university gets a lot of government money. So it's quasi-private, quasi-public. But
Hmm.
I taught at Rutgers. I taught at Baruch College. I taught at University of Central Arkansas. They were all government schools. So you're
Right.
now asking, well, how do I reconcile me teaching at a government school, given that I'm against government schools? Am I a hypocrite? Whatever. You're too polite to say that, but then that's the implication. Well, not only do I engage in teaching, and by the way, when I was a student, I went to Brooklyn College and I went to Madison High School, where Bernie Sanders and I were fellow track team members. So I not only taught at public schools, but I went to a public school as a student. How do I reconcile that? Well, I also use government roads. You know how I got to school today? I went on a government road. You know what I have in my wallet? I have government, what do you call it? Currency. The other day, I'm in New Orleans. I went to Audubon Park, which is a beautiful public park. I went there.
Hmm.
Well, the implication of your question is that if you're really against the government, you should have nothing to do with government. Forget about schools. You shouldn't have anything to do with government, period. Well, if you don't have anything to do with government, period, and government is so omnipresent, you have two choices. One, go and become a hermit living in some forest somewhere, although most of the forests are claimed by government, so you can't even go there. The other is commit suicide. And libertarianism is not a suicide pact. And even if you committed suicide, your body would probably go in some government cemetery, or maybe there are private cemeteries. Uh, I don't know. Government's involved in everything.
Hmm.
So I think that's wrong. Just because something is evil doesn't mean that you shouldn't deal with it. Look, Ragnar Danishkold, do you know who he is?
No.
Was? Did you ever read Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand?
No.
No.
I've
Well, you're in store for a treat.
Oh, I
That
know. I've read
that's
Fountainhead. I haven't gotten to Atlas Shrugged yet.
that is my favorite novel, a magnificent novel. It plus she converted me to libertarianism in the first
Mhm.
place. And Ragnar Danishkold had the view that governments were thieves, and what he did is he took government money. Well, I take government money. He gave it to Hank Reardon, who was a businessman. But the point is that if the government is a thief, then it's okay to relieve a thief of his ill-gotten gains. Well, I was relieving the government of its ill-gotten gains when I worked for the government school.
Yeah.
So I defended on that ground.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's interesting. Even Brian Kaplan wrote the case against education, and I'm like, only would the government, hire people to, talk crap about it itself.
Well, I'm
I,
not against education.
Right.
just against government education. Brian is against education, period, or even apart from government. He's such an extremist. That's why they call me Walter Moderate Block, because people like Brian are such extremists. I don't know how they can justify their extremism.
Right.
No, Brian is an excellent libertarian. He's a little weak on Austrian economics, but that's a different issue.
I know. I've seen that debate. Yeah. Um, so one of your big contributions is evictionism. And that idea was just so out there to me because my entire life you hear the pro-life and pro-choice, the vanilla arguments you always hear. Can you explain your arguments for evictionism?
Sure. By the way, Murray Rothbard was pro-choice. Ron Paul was pro-life. And they're 180 degrees apart from each other, right? And yet they're both astoundingly good libertarians. I mean, if you had to pick two libertarians who are our leaders, you would not go too far wrong if you picked those two. There are other people, but those two are pretty good, excellent, exquisite. And yet they differ on that issue. Well, I have what I consider a principled compromise between the two. So what do I mean by a principled compromise? Well, if you say 2 plus 2 is 4, and somebody else says 2 plus 2 is 6, a non-principled compromise would be 2 plus 2 is 5. It's a compromise because it goes halfway between the two, but it's not principled in the sense that you can't deduce 2 plus 2 equals 5 from anything except from, you're trying to compromise. So that's
Right.
an unprincipled compromise. Mine, I think, is a principled compromise. And I go back to private property rights, where all libertarians should go whenever they are dealing with a difficult challenge. So I ask, well, who owns the woman's body? And I answer, amazingly, the woman. She owns her body. She was there first. And therefore, if a trespasser comes along, even a human trespasser, and I think that life begins with the fertilized egg, because the sperm alone will not become a human being. The egg alone will not become a human being. But as soon as that sperm hits that egg, that's a human being. I don't wait for the heartbeat or for anything else like that. It's a human being once the sperm hits the egg. The joke in the Jewish tradition is, when the fetus is viable, when it graduates medical school. But actually, it's when the heart beats, where several states are now trying to have no abortions after that period. But I go earlier than the heartbeat. Just the fertilized egg is a human being. But now take the case of rape. A woman is walking down the street. She gets grabbed. She gets impregnated. And now there's a person growing inside of her property without her permission. Well, what do we call young people, innocent trespasser? What do we call people who are in other people's property without their permission? We call them trespassers. So what do you have? What rights do you have over a trespasser? What may you properly do? May you kill the trespasser? No. It's an innocent trespasser. The person is an innocent trespasser. It's not the fetus's fault. It's the fetus's dad's fault that this occurs. So what you do is you evict in the most gentlest manner possible. Look, if you set your foot on my front lawn, can I blow you away with a bazooka? No. What I do is I say, hey, do you realize you're on my front lawn? You say, oh, sorry, I didn't realize, and you get off. Well, that's the end of it. On the other hand, if you say, well, I don't care, I'm on your lawn and I'm staying here, I have to evict you in the gentlest manner possible. If I have a rubber bullet and a lead bullet, I should use the rubber bullet if both will get you off my property.
Right.
Well, so I say that the woman has a right to evict, but not to kill. So it's a compromise because the pro-life people say you don't have a right to evict and you don't have a right to kill. The pro-choice people say you have a right to evict and you have a right to kill. I say you only have a right to evict, but not to kill. So at present medical technology, in the third trimester, if you evict, the baby is viable outside the womb. So if you're in the 8th month or the 7th month, you can evict and the baby stays alive and somebody else will adopt the baby. On the other hand, if you're in the first trimester, the third month, and you evict, the baby will die. Well, too bad, because we have private property rights. We libertarians are predicated on private property rights. So this is a principled compromise, because if we adopt evictionism, 1/3 of all babies will now be saved, all babies in the 7th, 8th, and 9th month. And on the other hand, we will be pro-choice in the first 2 trimesters. But I'm sort of really pro-life in my heart of hearts. I like human beings. Some of my best friends are human beings. And I noticed that it's only in the third trimester at present medical technology. But in 10 years, maybe it'll be the 5th month. And in 30 years, maybe the 4th month. You know that in 500 years, if we don't blow ourselves up by then, the baby will be viable within 1 second of being a fertilized egg, right? And we will be able to pluck the baby out without killing the baby in 5,000 years from now. So if we adopt evictionism now, eventually we'll get to where we pro-life people want to be, namely all lives will be saved. But right now, we pro-lifers, we have to realize we're losing. We're losing this intellectual, moral, legal war. So that's another reason for adopting evictionism. At least you get 1/3 of a loaf, so to speak. Okay, so now take the case of voluntary sexual intercourse. We took the case of rape, where it's pretty clear that that baby is an invader, is a trespasser. But now take voluntary sexual intercourse, and now people say, well, if you engage in voluntary sexual intercourse, you're implicitly inviting the fetus in, and if you invite somebody in your airplane, you're not supposed to tell them to leave when you're at 30,000 feet, and stuff like that. And my answer to that is, yes, I believe in implicit contracts. You buy a cup of coffee and you drink it down, and they want you to pay $1 million. Forget it. You don't owe $1 million for a cup of coffee. There's an implicit contract that there's some sort of reasonable price, $1 or $2 or $5 or whatever. So is there an implicit contract when you have voluntary sexual intercourse? Did you really invite the fetus in? Well, you use birth control, let's say, but you realize that birth control is only 99% effective. Well, what about the other percent? Well, here's the other percent. Well, my rejection of this criticism is, well, for there to be an invitation, there has to be 2 people, an inviter and an invitee. And what was true at the time of sexual intercourse, there was no invitee, because remember, we said that the baby doesn't exist until the fertilized egg, but at the time of ejaculation, it takes, I don't know, a half hour or an hour or 5 hours for the sperm to go up the fallopian tube and meet the egg. So at the time of intercourse, or at the time of ejaculation, there was no person to invite. Therefore, you couldn't have invited anyone. There can't be an implicit contract, because even assuming that fetuses can make contracts, which is a whole other problem, there was no fetus at that time. So you didn't invite anyone. So I think that the evictionist theory is not vulnerable to any of the criticisms that are sometimes offered against it.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the deplatforming that's happening on social media, on Twitter and Facebook and all that. First of all, I'm willing to bet you recognize that there's a bias on who they're deplatforming, right?
Very slight.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about all the deplatforming? Do you think it's going to change? Do you think we're going to, do you think as like a society, we're going to move towards a more free speech or something more restrictive?
Well, I'm not that worried about deplatforming, because first of all, I support their right to deplatform. And they don't only deplatform conservatives. Sometimes they deplatform lefties, like this black guy, the minister, Farrakhan.
Mm-hmm.
They also deplatform him, plus 5 or 10 free enterprise or conservative people, and a libertarian or 2. So it's wildly biased against libertarians and conservatives. But it's private property. That's Zuckerberg's toy, or his property. And what I predict is that what will happen eventually is that conservatives and libertarians, someone will start something. I think MeWe is sort of like that,
Hmm.
where they're going to say, look, we favor free speech for anyone, even lefties. Marxists are welcome, but we're certainly not going to deplatform conservatives or libertarians. And that'll be the end of it, because then the left will stay with Google, and the right and libertarians will go with MeWe or some other kind of group, and we won't speak to each other. Or people will then say, okay, hey, maybe Zuckerberg will change his mind, and because he's losing a lot of customers.
Hmm.
I mean, half the country is conservative, half the country is liberal. So if you exclude half the country, you're not going to make as much money as if you don't exclude half the country. And also, this other group that I'm positing will not exclude anyone.
Right.
Now, I think you have to make a point about threats. You know, if I say I'm going to kill you, God forbid, well, then I should be excluded, because I should be put in jail if I seriously said that. Not only should I be excluded, I should be put in jail for making a threat, a threat of death, if I was serious. And obviously, you know, I'm not serious about that. So that would be the way I think to solve that one. Now, the more difficult one is not deplatforming, it's rather in the university. I'm at Loyola University. We have, I don't know, 250 professors, and we have maybe 4 or 5 libertarians. No, maybe about 6 or 7. Speaking of which, I want to insert a commercial message. How old are you?
23.
Oh, so you're out of college. Well, you're
Yeah.
you're too old. You're has-been. But high school seniors who are watching this, or people with children or grandchildren who are going to college, come to Loyola, because we have 7, no, maybe 8 different professors who are free enterprise. 8 out of 250. We are immense. And next door, Tulane, I think they only have 1, and they have maybe 1,000 professors. At LSU, down the street from us, they must have even more professors, and not a single one. They have 1 conservative and no libertarians. How do I know this? Because I gave a speech at LSU to 300 students, and I said, hey, are there any libertarian or conservative professors? They said, yeah, 1 conservative. So it's not so much the invitations, you know, when they, you know, like when Charles Murray goes to some school and they won't let him speak.
Hmm.
That's bad. But even worse is the bias of the professoriate. I mean, Charles Murray only gives 1 speech, but the professoriate gives a lecture, you know, 25, 30 times a semester.
Right.
And this is terrifically biased. And the problem is that, you know, you have public schools, or you have, with the exception of Hillsdale and Grove City, and maybe 1 or 2 others, all the schools take a lot of government money, and the government, not so much not at all with Donald Trump, but previously, the government is always left wing, and the educational establishment is left wing. So the big problem is not so much disinviting and disrupting speeches on campus, but the professoriate. There have been studies that, you know, sociology departments will have 30 Democrats and 1 Republican, or the philosophy department will have 40 lefties and none from the right. So this is a gigantic problem, much more serious, I think, than deplatforming, which I think will be easy to solve. You know, namely, look, suppose a newspaper said, well, we're going to be only a left-wing newspaper, and nobody on the right is going to read it. Well, then the other newspaper will have a competitive advantage. But it's harder with universities, because it's hard for universities to go broke because the government keeps supporting them.
Yeah. So not even in like the economics department, it's still zero libertarians at other
No,
schools.
no. In my economics department, we have 4 out of 4 Austro-libertarians.
Right.
So we're
But
magnificent. But in economics is the best of all the subjects. And by the way, there are certain subjects that are apolitical, math, physics, whatever,
yeah.
and they're not that biased. Although, you know, the social justice warriors are trying to input bias there too. But economics is the best of all the disciplines in this regard. There you'll get like 3 to 2, 3 Democrats to 2 Republicans. which is way better. 3-2 is better than 50-1, right? So economics is the best discipline in terms of the least bias in that way.
Mm-hmm.
I was on our inclusiveness panel. We have to have diversity, and I joined it because I wanted to have intellectual diversity. And I quit the committee because the committee said, no, we only want diversity of skin color and race and gender and sexual preference and, every other way except intellectual.
Right.
But you'd think a university should be mainly worried about intellectual areas, not what color your skin is. Color of your skin is irrelevant. You got many black lefties, and then you have Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams, who were black, although they're called Oreo cookies because somehow it's thought if you're authentically black, you have to be a socialist. And these guys are not socialists. Therefore, they're Oreo cookies. They're really white on the inside, which is utter nonsense.
Well, so going back to the social media, one of the things I'm concerned about is you have people that are like nationalists, like Tucker Carlson and stuff, pushing for government to step in. Do you think that's likely to happen?
Well, I don't think it's likely to happen, and I don't think it should happen because private property rights.
Sure.
I mean, Zuckerberg was one of the first to do this, and it's his property, it's his toy. If he wants to play that way, God bless him, let him play that way. Okay, no conservatives because they're all hateful, right? Libertarians and conservatives, everything they say is hateful, and we have to get rid of them. Plus Farrakhan. Okay, he got rid of one lefty. But I would just hope that there'd be another platform that people could use that would be more open to everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, I wanted to go back to you grew up with Bernie Sanders, and I was wondering, what's it like to see that, like you said, he does what you do, where he takes things to their logical conclusions. But what's it like to see his logical conclusions and how well they're doing? I mean, especially when, really all the evidence points to the opposite of what he believes.
Well, he's doing very well. He's articulate. He's sincere. He's a good speaker. He's passionate about this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but for him, socialism is the Sweden and Denmark and the Scandinavian countries. One of my books, we ranked the countries of the world in terms of economic freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And guess where the Scandinavian countries came in? They came in the top quintile. They're all very free enterprise relative to the other countries. So Bernie is, just ridiculous. He doesn't know economics. He's very good on foreign policy, and he's pretty good on personal liberties. Tulsi Gabbard is my favorite Democrat on foreign policy, but Bernie is a close second to her, namely the U.S. He's sort of like Ron Paul. The U.S. should pull out all of its troops back here. The function of the military is to defend the country, not to export the American way or anything like that. So I support Bernie in that regard, but on economics, he's horrid. By the way, I invited Ron Paul to speak here at Loyola, and he got a great audience. And guess who I just invited to speak here? Bernie.
Okay.
I don't know if Bernie will come, but my idea is we want to have some diversity of ideas. Yeah. Bernie and Ron Paul are both straight white male, and I don't care. It doesn't matter. It's just they have different ideas, and I want my students to be subjected to all sorts of ideas, Bernie included, even though I don't agree with him.
Yeah. Yeah, going along those lines, I'm a big fan of Mises' the anti-capitalistic mentality, and I was wondering if, what are your thoughts on why we're so anti-capitalist, especially when we have so much purchasing power now? What do you think goes on in people's heads to where they get wrapped up and the main ideas today are based around socialism?
Well, I just got a paper accepted where I try to answer that very question.
Hmm.
And my answer is along the lines of evolutionary psychology and sociobiology. And what sociobiology is the theory that we are the way we are now because of what it meant to live and bring children into the next generation a million years ago or 100,000 years ago when we were in the caves or the trees.
Hmm.
And the idea here is that we're hardwired towards socialism and not toward capitalism. Because a million years ago, we lived in groups of 20 or 30 or 50 people,
Yeah.
little teeny tribes. And if this week you get sick and I help you, and next week I get sick and you help me, our tribe prospers. On the other hand, there was a tribe with equal opposable thumbs, equal strength, equal brain power. You get sick this week, I say the hell with you. Next week I get sick, you don't help me. Our tribe doesn't survive. So in order to survive, you need benevolence. You need the hardwiring. You need some sort of keen appreciation of helping our fellow man. I get students in my freshman class, and I talk about the price gouging or the minimum wage, and they all hate price gouging and they love the minimum wage because they are benevolent, because they are hardwired. They are biologically, what's the word, open to that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I have to try to dig it out of them to show that price gouging is good and minimum wage isn't good.
Hmm.
But I think that the reason for the popularity of socialism is biology, and we libertarians have a hard row to hoe. It's sort of like the pushing the rock of Sisyphus up the hill, and then the rock keeps coming down. We push it up again, keeps coming down. That's why Ron Paul only got 1% of the vote. That's why the Libertarian Party isn't doing as well as it otherwise would.
Yeah.
That's why education is full with socialism. That's why so many young people, there's a statement that if you're not a socialist at 20, you have no heart. If you're still a socialist at 50, you have no brain. But there's a lot of truth in that. Heart. I mean, Bernie has heart. He wants to help the poor. He wants to raise their wages with the minimum wage. He wants them to have free education and free medical care and free this and free that. It's sort of he's got his thumb on the pulse of the human being, and the human being is sort of nice. Okay, there are exceptions. There's Hitler and Stalin and all, but even they were trying to improve the human race in their own weird way.
Hmm.
Hitler was just trying to get rid of vermin. Now, I don't consider Jews vermin or blacks or gays,
Oh, yeah.
but he was trying to improve the human race. I mean, even our man Hitler was infused with this idea of helping the human race.
Right.
So I think a lot of the socialism is due to helping people. And Bernie has struck a chord among young people, especially, and not just young people. And I think it's our duty, our obligation, who know economics, to say, look, socialism is Venezuela. Look at East Germany and West Germany. Look at North Korea and South Korea.
Hmm.
You had almost what do you call it? Controlled experiment. East Germany and West Germany and North Korea and South Korea had the same people, the same culture, the same IQ, the same anything you can imagine. And just an act of war broke them into two groups. And one adopted a socialist policy and the other a quasi-capitalist policy. And one is prosperous and the other isn't. And somehow we've forgotten about that. And what we have to do is tell people, scream from the rooftops that, socialism is, a moral monstrosity. Not only moral, but economic monstrosity.
Hmm.
We've only got 2 minutes. I sort of allotted 1 hour for you.
Oh, okay.
So one more question, and then I want to ask you. Well, let me ask you the question. You said that
Okay.
you got involved with me because of my book, Defending the Undefendable.
Uh-huh.
Was it Defending the Undefendable 1 or 2? Because I have two distinct volumes on that. I was just curious as to which book got you.
Um, which which one defends blackmail?
Defending 1.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
so also, I just wrote Defending 2, and now I'm in the middle of writing Defending 3. So if you
Okay.
like Defending 1, you might like 2 and 3 when it comes out.
That's awesome. Yeah.
One last question or one last point?
Yeah, sure. Um, if you could have everyone in the world read one book and just understand it on a deep, fundamental level, what book would you choose and why?
Well, let me pick 2 books.
Okay.
You know, when people offer me vanilla or chocolate ice cream, I say both. The two books that converted me, the two books that Ayn Rand and Nathaniel Brennan recommended to me were Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand and Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt.
Okay.
Now, there are better books. Anything Mises wrote or Rothbard wrote are better. But we're talking about intro that everyone could read,
Hmm.
and I would pick those two books.